Hey everyone, this is Mac Pierre-Louis. Welcome back to LMI, Lawyers, Mediators International, part of the LMI network. So I was recently in Massachusetts, specifically in Boston and in Amherst. I was there to shoot some segments for the documentary Can ODR Change the World? While there, I got to connect with one of the contributors, Leah because she's an author of the book Governing Artificial Intelligence. And she and some of her co authors joined me for this recording we did just a couple weeks ago. And so here is what the back of the book says about the book Governing Artificial Intelligence Issues in Online Dispute Resolution. As we face the profound and rapidly expanding impacts of artificial intelligence, ethical and practical questions arise in harnessing it effectively while preventing its worst externalities. Governing AI examines the two main avenues of providing guidance to AI developers and users: regulation and legislation, and international and professional standards. Along with an overview of both pathways, an in-depth case study is provided, and key questions are raised and suggestions offered. Ultimately, the argument is made that neither regulation and legislation nor standards alone can effectively govern AI development and use. Rather, coordination among government entities, international standards organizations or ISOs, and international professional standards will be the most effective approach to governance. So we all love AI. However, most of us are starting to realize there are concerns to be had. And it's going to take all of us to know what those issues are that might cause disruptions in online mediations, any kind of ODR. And so that's what this book's all about, is to help make us think about ways to stay safe and to make sure that we're not taken for a ride by AI. All right. So listen to this segment if you are in any way interested in knowing how to stay safe in AI. And we start off with Daniel Rainey.
Well, my background is in communication theory and dispute resolution. I started working in online dispute resolution in the mid-90s, mid-late 90s, sort of independently of what was going on at UMass Amherst, although I joined with them fairly quickly. I was my first introduction to dispute resolution and technology was with the National Mediation Board. They were looking for somebody who knew something about technology and knew something about mediation. And in 1995, 96, there were very few of us on the ground. And so I started at the National Mediation Board trying to integrate the mediation they did with mediators traveling basically almost all the time and trying to figure out how to use technology to do mediation, not only with people who were mobile, but with parties who were in mediation for a long period of time. So that we were trying to figure out how to optimize the work between sessions. And so that's where I really got started. I've been really sort of focused on technology and dispute resolution ever since.
Awesome. So let's go in a circle. Chris, you're next. Who's Chris Draper?
Thank you. I'm a technologist by origin, but I oddly arrived to dispute resolution heavily again through the National Mediation Board because one of our partners played poker with Dan's chief of staff, and he said, "Hey, you should come talk to us about this thing you're doing with online dispute resolution tool," which we didn't know that was a name for it at the time. We just thought it was a contract negotiation support system, and got kicked off into this really, really interesting world where my background in integrating new and often ultra-hazardous technologies into legally sensitive and human-centric environments was really an incredibly interesting path. That's led us to a whole different number of threads, and the latest is I'm co-founder and CEO of Morrigan AI, which allows you to understand, especially in distributed teams, like a lot of our mediators or a lot of our mediation, ADR and ODR support, understand what is your true AI footprint. How is AI being used within your systems for any information flow coming in and out? How much of your information flows are human versus not? And helps you understand a little bit better about the different shadow AIs and agentic uses that are occurring with or without your knowledge potentially. So, and a lot of that is applied into, again, what is the ethical, appropriate use of these tools How do we know that we're tracking them effectively? And within the book, I focus on chapter 3 as well, is knowing how AI truly is working with respect to how humans engage with it. How should we be approaching and thinking about regulation as we're trying to, in both dispute resolution, but also other legally sensitive environments, figure out how to integrate it effectively within our culture and society?
Awesome. And Chris, you're the only one I have not met in person yet, but one day. Dan.
Well, I used to live in Texas, so I must have missed you by a bit. So, I mean, it's a
Yes.
small state, I hear. So,
Oh, no, 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 it's pretty big. Yes, but you're always welcome back. And so finally, we have Leah, who I'm sitting right next to. And thank you so much, Leah, for hosting me. She's been great.
My pleasure.
We've been doing the recording for the documentary Can ODR Change the World? And so she's one of the guests on it. And so we got done wrapping that up. And now we are having you back because you're the co-author of Governing Artificial Intelligence. So can you give us a quick little introduction?
Yes, thank you so much. I am the director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution, which those that came before me, Ethan Katch and Janet Rifkin, developed the center in the late 90s when the internet went public to create the idea. The ODR is a brainchild of um, my elders in the legal studies department at the University of Massachusetts in the US, where I am now a faculty member. I joined them in some of the early experimentation as a graduate student and had the pleasure of working with Dan on some of those early experiments, also with the National Mediation Board. And I teach in legal studies now. And my particular passion and interest is looking at issues regarding ethics and help to develop the standards for online dispute resolution, which is just frankly the standards for applying technology to dispute resolution. I'll be talking about the chapter in the book that relates directly to that. I am a mediator by training and a mediation trainer as well.
Awesome. So it's great to see all of you. I will briefly read Scott Cooper's small blurb in the back of the book. Scott has built schools for the Peace Corps. He worked on Capitol Hill from 1981 to 1995. He's worked for the American Electronics Association and HP, and he ended his formal career as vice president for policy and government affairs for the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. So his big focus has been on standard setting. And so definitely you can check him out when you get the book. But let's go ahead and proceed to Dan, back to Dan. If you could just give us a little overview, Dan, because I think you can set the stage up for what we'll discuss further in the book.
Sure. I guess the thing that we started out with was why write this book and why write this book now? And the basic answer to that is that you cannot ignore artificial intelligence. It's there everywhere, and it's becoming more and more pervasive in the way that we do our lives. And so the question we had was, is it possible for us to in some fashion or in some way to govern or to control artificial intelligence development? And we have two answers to that. One is no, and the other is maybe. The no is that if by control or by governance you mean can we put a fence around it so that we guard against all the negative things that could happen as a result of the use of AI? The answer to that is a hard no. It's not possible to do that. It's been developed in such a way and it's out there in such a way is that people who want to do bad things have access to it and can do bad things, and that's always going to be the case. But if you think about governance as the ability to give guidance to people who are going to develop and use artificial intelligence ethically, who want to do that, who want to use it ethically, then yes, the answer is that we can do that. We can give a bit of guidance. And we take three approaches basically in the book, three venues, three domains, if you will, in which governance can occur. One is regulation and law, and Chris will talk more about this. Regulation and law has a place, especially in high-level issues, but it has a place in governance, but it can't do it by itself. There are some drawbacks, among them the fact that it's bound mostly by venue, and that it's very difficult to develop. So it's generally behind the curve. But there is a place for it, and Chris will talk about that. Another approach is international standards like the ISO. Again, they cross borders, but it's voluntary. Does take a long time to develop, and the chances of them being directly targeted towards some of the more narrow uses of AI that dispute resolvers would want to do is pretty slim. Although Leah will talk a bit about how we've overcome that to some degree. And the third area that we looked at, the third domain, is professional standards. That is, standards that are developed by a specific body of people who are doing a specific kind of work, whether it be mediation, arbitration, the law, medicine, whatever it happens to be. Being able to develop standards and guidance for people using artificial intelligence in those professions that will allow you to operate ethically and to do as little harm as possible. And so our argument basically is, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues, is that any one of those doesn't work by itself. But if you take the three of those things together and think rationally about how to join them together, then you've got a shot at controlling or governing artificial intelligence. And that's kind of where we started with the book.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Chris, with regards to your chapter and your main contribution, can you add a little bit more of a layer to what Dan has said?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Dan and I, why we work very, very well, is that fundamentally we're both our deep superpower is cynicism. And I say that because when you're looking at the risks of AI, one of the challenges of it is, as Dan identifies, individuals who want to harm you have access to harm you with this tool. The challenge that I think we need to face, especially when we're dealing in the ODR space and dealing especially with at-risk communities and those who may not understand the tool, is as technologists, as a culture, as society, we need to be more concerned about the fact that the vast majority of harms of AI are both human-centric and accidental. The risks are not things as often that are trying to get us as they are that comfort that builds from a tool that seems to be our friend too often and develops this spew speed of stuff that looks right, yet is being continually based off synthetic realities, which are systematically, iteratively, and exponentially diverging from truth. So the sections that I deal in are really saying, if we think about their responsibility, and I would argue that, it's our ethical obligation to be responsible with AI. And in order to be responsible and be ethical, what that means is if you can increase safety within the book being defined as the iterative reduction in the probability or magnitude of a negative outcome, that is what we need to be leaning for. Those are sort of the core ethos of how we need to look at this technology in the context of the whole system. So if we're looking at dispute system design, for example, obviously, Amy and I'm blanking, just had a great update to the original dispute system design book, came out just recently on the ODR side of Janet. Sorry, Amy and Janet's book just came out there, built off some great work of all the sort of the really foundational folk. All of that great work that we're dealing with in the past, we need to start applying that lens of AI, which is fundamentally a probability model. It has access to some pretty impressive libraries and will, if used untethered and if used without a thought to system, if used without too much thought to those communities it's interacting with, be an ultra hazardous technology akin to dropping an atom bomb in a crowded city. And so if we think about this ultra hazardous capability of the tool, the fact that little tweaks and little accidents, because of its truly human dangers, if we look at how we need to protect those and look at how we need to protect society, Chapter 3 gets into, once we know what the standards are we should be working with, how should we be applying those standards, and how should we be thinking about the protections we're looking to implement in the different regions or verticals in which we're working. So whether it be ODR, whether it be labor, whether it be anything else, the goal of my two sections is to help us think about what is this tool, what is safety, and then help us focus our understanding, our debate onto the fundamental questions that we need to be answering as we're starting to think about protection. The questions with AI aren't things like, hey, is this neural net built with the right code? It's, what's an acceptable level of addiction within society? what is an appropriate representation of a human or human work that I'm being fairly compensated for or not. It's issues of theft. It's issues of transparency. It's issues of what is equitable, what's appropriate for equitable leveling within dispute resolution space, knowing that these tools are not traditional products on their own, but are amplifiers and accelerants of the human actions that are really that natural system, which is at the core of what makes great mediators, great ODR professionals, and great ODR technology so important to get right.
Thank you, Chris. And Leah, based on your contributions, can you add your own layer to what Dan and Chris had said?
Certainly. For one thing, let me just say that I think that the way that we're thinking about what ODR is, we're really talking about anytime technology is harnessed for dispute resolution, for a section of a process or for the entire process. So even for processes where people meet face-to-face, but they harness technology during that process, we would consider that falling under the umbrella of online dispute resolution. So with that in mind, I think the section of the book that I focused on fits under two of the categories, because actually the online dispute resolution standards are both from within a profession, but they're also from the international sphere. And so the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution has over 50 fellows from 6 continents. They were the generators, not the only ones that contributed to, but the major generators of the online dispute resolution standards. Those standards have ended up being promulgated in 2017 originally, and then were revised to include artificial intelligence in May 2022. Actually, ironically, about 6 months before generative AI went public for free and really altered our world in general, but certainly people began to experiment far more with applying AI to technology. I will also note that the standards that came from the center, as well as the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution, ICODR, they collaborated in developing these standards. They were adopted by ISO, the organization Dan mentioned earlier in the podcast. That's the International Organization for Standardization. And ISO has 173 countries' standards bodies as members. And I'm mentioning this in detail because it shows the impact of ODR, that countries around the world are paying attention to it. Impact of the importance of ethical standards because countries around the world are paying attention to that, and also gives us an example of international collaboration that has been successful in creating standards that are now worldwide or global. ISO spent several years negotiating among countries and determined that they would accept verbatim the National Center and ICODR standards. There's only one small change, and that is ISO is required to use the word should instead of the word must. So each of the standards are described that way. Otherwise, they are verbatim of the Center and ICODR standards. So what you have are standards that were developed within a profession and also developed across nations. They are thin enough to hopefully be relevant and translatable to different sectors of all of our societies, whether it's labor mediation, whether it's international commercial arbitration, whether it's applying technology to court systems. And ISO is particularly focused on e-commerce, but the standards themselves were developed for being international as well as located within a profession. This makes it somewhat unique. It's not rare. It's not the only case, but somewhat unique in the development of standardization. So as I mentioned, we fall under the category of international as well as the category of professional. And we hope that they are useful not only because they reflect a kind of ethical and moral stance on how to practice, but also because they will point people towards how they can make their practice in line with the kind of expectations and norms and standards in our field already, but specifically focused on technology. So the 9 standards are accessibility, accessible, accountable, competent, confidential, equal, fair and impartial, legal, secure, and transparent. And each one of those standards has a paragraph or two that are specifically designed for those that are involved in handling disputes, whether it's dispute prevention, dispute management, dispute resolution, forms of access to justice or healing, where people are either negotiating or there's a third party assisting and they're harnessing the fourth party, which is technology. I will also just mention, we speak some in the chapter about ODR and its way of contributing to the ODR standards and ways that it contributes to global governance around AI by speaking about the fact that there's really now a fifth party. And the fifth party are the LLM, the large language model architects, by as well as the coders that are developing software, whether they're developing it specifically for an ODR platform or they're developing software that practitioners are pulling off the shelf and using on their own, whether it's they're using the cloud, whether they're using video conferencing, or they're using collaborative writing or e-payment scheduling tools, just as an example. So we hope that it is a good case study to show the value, the importance, and complicated nature of creating ethical standards across jurisdictions and across disciplines.
Awesome. So this is a question for each of you. So who do you have in mind should we read this book? Like, who is it for? Is it for the mediator who doesn't know anything about technology? Or is it more for mediator trainers maybe who need to impart some knowledge onto their future students? I'm just curious, who's this book for?
Well, I think it covers a wide range, I think. What we would like, or at least what I would like people to know or think when they get through reading this book, is that this is something I should be paying attention to. We don't give prescriptive approaches to, this is how you should do it. But what we are saying is, and I'll quote my colleague Chris here a little bit, is that when we developed the atomic bomb, we did it in the middle of the desert, and we did enough damage out there. But what we're doing now is we're taking something that's roughly a social atomic bomb and testing it on Main Street. And we should be concerned about this. I guess when I talk to mediators, when I talk to third parties about this, I point to 3 things that are radically affected by the use of AI. One is confidentiality. Another is competence. What does it mean to be competent? And the third is, what does it do to self-determination? Because there are basically 50 or so different modes of mediation practice around the world, but all of them in one way or another deal with the notion of privacy and confidentiality, what it means to be competent to do the work that you're doing, and how you deal with the notion of self-determination. And the use of artificial intelligence affects all of those. And I guess one of the things that I would want people to take away from the book that we've written is, yeah, there are several ways to approach this, but above all, we should have a voice in this. We should be talking about this, especially we should be talking about this in the professions that we practice, so that those things that are affected most by the work that we do, we think about and we try our very best to give guidance to, instead of simply sitting back and letting somebody who's a fifth party throw something at us that we then figure out how to use.
Yes.
And
Chris?
in that vein, I think as a follow-up, I think the other piece I think we want out of it, I think, is that if for those who are really thinking about the system, thinking about how we should be approaching this in a deliberate, consistent, collaborative manner, is hopefully, especially within chapter 3, forcing us a little bit out of our normal approach to thinking about these tools. We're very, very used to, especially in a community where many have come from human-centric and technology is this little piece I can add, to not really thinking about, as I bring in what is a wholly fundamentally different integration of technology into the human sphere. We're talking about a tool that is truly human augmentation. It's not the same as Zoom. Zoom was worried about, where's my data? Who can have access to things? Is this piece of data going to be useful for someone else if they get it? We're now talking about something that fundamentally observes a world through its potentially broken lens or biased lens, generates its own data set for its own repopulation of new information that I now need to figure out what to do with, right? We have an informational sovereignty problem when we had digital sovereignty problems. We have issues of what is a human now. We have issues of what is the voice. We have issues of in our transcription tools, what's actually right and what happened. We have issues of censorship that are really sort of falling under the radar in a lot of ways. We're allowing marketing jargon to cloud our perception of these tools. Hallucinations. Hallucinations are not the system breaking. That is not the system doing something wrong. The system worked fine. It's just the system does what it does, which is at a certain probability will come up with its own truth that is completely counter to objective reality. That's a different way of looking at these things, different way of framing. It's a different way as we think about standards we need to be looking at it. We have been sitting for a little too long, and I say this as someone who's in the AI space at the moment, not in a self-loathing way, but the industry's objective is to tie safety to reliability. And the objective of chapters 2 and 3 is to say, if we just accept the party line of this is where we should be looking and this is where the danger is, we'll be missing the true problem. We'll be missing the real way to think about this in a holistic, systems, safety-based manner. And I think for those who are really trying to figure out what are the standards of tomorrow, what are the acceptable practices of tomorrow, what could be the standards and regulations of tomorrow, we want to make sure that those folk who are running that class or providing this access to their students to start thinking about it now. For those who are sitting in those areas, writing those standards and writing those rules and thinking about how we should be approaching it strategically next, that's the group that I hope will take a look at this and say, hey, we don't have all the answers in here, but our goal is at least to have a framework, examples, and some ways to jumpstart us out of the normal track and sometimes intellectual rut we find ourselves when faced with a technology that, as Dan identifies, is ultra hazardous, is currently being tested without regard for societal safety, and really does need to be reimagined from a completely opposite viewpoint of how we have dealt with other systems before.
Thank you. And Leah, who should be reading this book?
So I think that it can have relevance to a wide variety of those in the population. So because it's focused on AI and governance, legal, regulatory standards, then those that are interested in artificial intelligence, even if they aren't a dispute resolver, could find this, we hope, helpful to the conversation. For those in the dispute resolution field, I want to speak to the practitioners among us and say there's a series of questions at the end of the book that are designed specifically for you, for us, that those of us who are practitioners, to consider as we're deciding, do we want to use an ODR platform? Do we want to use some other form of technology? And then going back to some of the points that Dan made about what's going to impact on confidentiality, the questions will hopefully stimulate decisions about whether you change the protocol in your practice, not just whether you use technology or not, and maybe cause you to realize that there's additional protocols you want to add in addition to the ones that you're already using. For those that are well acquainted, as I'm sure everyone who's a practitioner is, with the typical standards in the field or in your state, or for those that are court-connected practitioners and there's a court set of standards for mediators, for example, the vast majority of them still have nothing related to technology in them. And so the ODR standards that are specifically only about technology and dispute resolution are designed to go hand in glove with these other standards. And so from a practical point of view, we hope that those that are practicing will find this useful. And I echo what Chris said. For those that are teaching and training, or for students, this is very important for us because we want to alter the way that the field is addressing technology. And those that are coming the next generation will be coming as digital natives, those that grew up using not just technology in general, but increasingly those that had AI incorporated in their day-to-day life. Lastly, I'll say that as we go broader, those that are running programs that have rosters of mediators or arbitrators or running court programs, I think these are urgent issues to be considering, the questions that are raised for those from a systems perspective and are making decisions about the transparency that is needed for letting participants or disputants know. Here is ways we're using AI to increase the opportunities for you to brainstorm, increase the opportunities for you to hear suggestions from AI about how you might want to resolve a dispute. Or what are the risks when we use large language models that provide data that will have hallucinations inside of them? And how do we need to keep human intervention still within our mindset? That's one of the aspects of the standards that say that there ought to be no decision making that's substantive in dispute resolution outcomes that don't provide the opportunity for human intervention. So these are all things to be thought about as a student, as a faculty member or a trainer, as a practitioner, and as a systems manager.
Thank you all. Well, to start wrapping up, give me some takeaways, guys, just in your own perspectives individually, about what this book meant for you. Because every time you publish something, it's always a big piece of your life that you devote into it, right? A lot of time and energy. I know you guys are colleagues, and I've
Yeah.
worked with all of you guys in some capacity. But what did this book mean to you when you wrote it?
Well, I'll start with what AI means to me in a sense as a practitioner and as somebody who deals with the ethical end of things quite a lot. AI plays a siren song. If you know the story of the sirens that play the song that lures you onto the rocks if you're a sailor, it's really, really easy to have fun with AI and to very quickly integrate AI into what you're doing, whether it's professional or personal. And the risk is that we do that without thinking about the real consequences. We do that without thinking about the real risk. And I would hope that anybody who reads this book will understand that we're not saying AI is useless. We're not saying that AI is bad. We're not saying stay away from it. What we're saying is this is like handling a piece of dynamite that you've lit the fuse on. Pay attention, because if you keep it too close and you don't pay attention to what's going on, it will blow up in your face.
Mm. Yeah. Chris?
Well, yeah, and I think similarly, like what has been exciting about working on this book is the broad range of experiences that were able to come together in something that, and I think every time there was a new OpenAI announcement of, oh, we got X, Y, and Z, there's always a concern of, oh man, is this book actually going to come out too late, or is there a piece in
Hmm.
here that is now no longer relevant? And when we're looking at the field of dispute resolution, I think what has been in some ways exciting and disturbing about this book process is that it is still almost more hyper relevant now than it was. It has been interesting to me that we haven't really caught on to the fact enough within all of us that it is essentially a tool a lot like a really eager intern who has no context on life. And if you aren't going to use an overly eager, zero context intern in your practice, you probably shouldn't also use these other tools. I think that it is interesting that the challenges we're going to be facing, I think there is to say that there's an LLM bubble, to say there's not an LLM bubble, I think is just marketing crazy. We're going to end up with with significant challenges as we come on the cost and utility of these tools. There's going to be rapid changes in what we've integrated and what remains accessible. We're going to have rapid changes in hopefully what is appropriately legal. I think that there are, even within the AI space, we're starting to see cracks in our universal understanding of privacy. Privacy in America and privacy in Europe are fundamentally different. The context is different. These types of cracks we haven't really had to think about as much before, right? Privacy for us in the US is a property right. In Europe, it's a fundamental right. And how we approach these things are going to differ. And I think the beauty of AI being international and the beauty of AI not truly being that product being an extension of its user And those issues that we raise in the book and how we should think about them and how we can provide ourselves access to an implementable strategy for ethics within the governing framework of these tools, looks like we probably got it right, which is exciting because it hasn't yet become out of fashion, hasn't yet become wrong, and I think it is providing a really great solid framework, the one that I think we really need to take to heart and use as broadly as possible throughout NCTDR, ICODER, and the industry more broadly when we're looking to think about dispute resolution.
Awesome. And Leah, last word.
So I guess I'd first just say what a pleasure to work with these three colleagues and friends. Got to know them better, even though I've had long relationships with several of them. So a joy to learn from them and collaborate and create something together. It also is exciting and daunting to be part of the larger conversation about AI in general, but particularly in our field. And I would say to me, AI is really a magnifier, and it magnifies opportunities for public good as well as individual good. And so the standards are actually designed, the ODR standards are actually designed to encourage its use when it's going to increase access to justice, when it's going to increase access to opportunities for healing or problem solving or for dispute prevention. So thinking about it in the positive light, standards are not only about no, but then also thinking about the importance of governing. And what we've tried to do is look at the ecosystem of governance, as we've mentioned already. And the standards are only one aspect of it. And as we've talked about, since AI is a disruptor across national boundaries and legal jurisdictions, then ODR standards, these thin ODR standards, thank goodness, have some relevance, we believe, across these jurisdictions, but inside of sectors of society, inside of particular aspects of the dispute resolution field, and within particular cultures, we may need to give best practice and guidance in ways that are different than in other sections. So I hope that this will stimulate more engagement across the field with people who are thinking about how to make AI useful and how to protect us from the worst that it could bring, and to our individual caseloads, to the people that we work with, and our society in general.